In this movie, I'll show you how to convert your traced artwork into editable path outlines, and then I'll show you how to simplify the results. Notice that the 600 ppi version of the scan is selected at the moment. As soon as I convert the scan to path outlines, I lose the image and the auto scan and everything else associated with it. I don't want to lose that information, so I'm going to make a duplicate of this item by clicking on it here inside the Layers panel. So you'll have to have your layer expanded, as I do. Then go to the Layers panel flyout menu and choose Duplicate 600 ppi in order to create a copy of it. Then you can go ahead and hide the original, just so that it's kept safely aside. And I'm going to press Ctrl-0 or Command-0 on the Mac in order to back out from my image. To convert the trace to path outlines, you go up to the Control panel once again, and you click on this button, Expand. And as you'll learn over the course of these movies, expand is Illustrator's word for converting just about anything to path outlines. So I'll go ahead and click on the button, and there we have it. However, notice that we have a lot of stuff going on, including this big rectangle around the entire butterfly. To get to the bottom of this, we have to figure out what it is we're looking at. And you can get a sense of what's selected at any given moment in time by taking a look at this first item, the very first word in the control panel over on the left-hand side. So for example, if I were to turn the trace back on and meatball it, then I would see that I have an image tracing. If I were to turn that item back off and then meatball this new thing, which is called 600 ppi, I'll go ahead and rename it paths. Then I'll see that it is a group, which means to gain access to those path outlines, I need to ungroup this thing. So I'll go up to the Object menu, and I'll choose the Ungroup command, which has a keyboard shortcut of Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on the Mac. And now notice that I have just a ton of paths here inside of my Layers panel, most of which are showing up as hollow, meaning that they're blank. They don't have any fill or stroke associated with them. Then we have a couple of black blobs down here toward the bottom, and then one version of the butterfly itself. I'm going to click off the path outlines to deselect them. And then I need to find that outermost path, which means I need to kind of hunt around with my arrow cursor. Notice as I move the cursor around, every once in a while, I see a black square next to it, and that tells me that there's something under the cursor. So if I don't see a black square, there's nothing to select there. If I do see a black square, there is something to select. So at this location, something's going on, so I'll click on it, and sure enough, that's that blank rectangle that's surrounding the entire butterfly and tracing around it as well. Notice it has no fill and no stroke. You can see that up here in the control panel. So what I want to do is select all the other blank paths as well, and I can do that using this icon. It says Select Similar Objects. And just to make sure it's selecting the right kind of similar objects, click on the down-pointing arrowhead next to it, and confirm that all is selected. Assuming that it is, you can go ahead and click on it if you want to. Then you click on that icon, and Illustrator goes ahead and selects all of the path outlines that have no fill and no stroke. Now you can press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac to get rid of them. And notice that cleans up our Layers panel quite a bit. But we do still have two blobs someplace here. We don't want them. So I'm going to meatball one of them and then shift meatball the other one. And so we must have some little artifacts up here in the upper right corner of the butterfly and down left as well. Now that I've selected both of them, I'll go ahead and press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac to get rid of them as well. And we're left with one big compound path. In other words, there's a big tracing around the outside of the butterfly, and then there's all the subpaths inside the butterfly that are cutting holes. I'm going to rename this path Butterfly because after all, that's what it is. And then I'll click on the butterfly, and I'll drag it over here to the left-hand side. And I'm pressing the Shift key, by the way, as I drag in order to constrain the angle of my drag to exactly horizontal. Now you can see that we have an awful lot of anchor points. You can further simplify this path if you want to, using a command known as Simplify. But before we choose it, I'm going to press Control-H or Command-H on the Mac to hide my selection edges. And then I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on that most fragile detail inside the wings so that I can keep track of it. And I'll go up to the Object menu, choose Path, and choose Simplify. And what this command does is it reduces the number of anchor points inside the selected paths based on a couple of criteria. So when I choose a command, I bring up the Simplify dialog box, as you can see. If you want to get a quick sense of how much simplification is happening, then go ahead and turn on the Preview checkbox. And you can now see that the original version of this path, before I chose the command, had 2,040 anchor points. The simplify command has reduced the number of anchor points to 242. That's great news. We have a much simpler path, which means it'll be easier to edit, it will print more quickly, and so forth. However, it looks like garbage. We're losing so much detail here. Notice the difference. If I turn off the preview checkbox and then I turn it back on, this simplification is coming at the expense of an awful lot of detail. The first thing you want to do is change the angle threshold. By default, it's 0 degrees, meaning that Illustrator is trying to round off everything. So the first thing to do is modify the angle threshold value. It represents which corners are getting rounded away. And at 0 degrees, you're essentially saying everything. Every corner inside of these paths should be rounded, and that's not what we want. You can take that value as high as 180 degrees, which tells Illustrator to round away no corners whatsoever. My recommendation, however, based on experience, is to set this value to 135 degrees. That tends to give you good results. In our case, it still looks rotten, as you can see, but we have gained a few anchor points back. We're up to 289. The next thing you do is you take that curve precision value, which is set to 50% by default, which is way too low. You never want to leave it that low. You want to raise it to its maximum value of 100%, meaning maintain as many curves as possible. Maintain the original forms of the paths. And notice now that boosts those anchor points way up to 1,656, but we're still nearly 400 anchor points down from the original. So this is quite a simplification at this point. Then you click inside this value and you press the down arrow key and you keep an eye on what's going on inside of the illustration. And notice at 97%, even this high, we're starting to lose definition. I'll turn off the preview checkbox. This is the way the trace looked before, and this is the way it looks now. So we're losing a lot of definition, not only in that fragile detail, but throughout the path outlines. I found where this particular path is concerned that I needed to take the value up to 99% in order to keep things looking good. So I'll turn off preview checkbox. This is the original path outline. And if I turn it back on, this is the way it looks now. And yet, meanwhile, we have pared down the number of anchor points from 2,040 to 1,416. So we've peeled away 600 in all. And just FYI, I find that a value between 95% and 100% ends up working best. Click OK in order to accept that change. Now I'll press Control-0, Command-0 on the Mac to back out. That, folks, is how you go about expanding and simplifying your traced artwork. In the next movie, we'll transform our half a butterfly into a full one.